I'm always interested in hearing the stories about movies that would have gone a very different way if studios didn't get involved, director's cuts, alternate versions of movies, stuff like that. I always think that stuff is interesting, and I feel like I've found the Snyder cut of horror sequels, and I'm talking about Cabin Fever 2. And the weird thing is too, this is a straight-to-DVD sequel basically. It had a limited run, limited release, and it actually came from Ty West, who would go on to be very successful. He would do the X trilogy, Pearl, Maxine, and this was one of his first things, and I believe his first big project. After Eli Roth really broke ground with that first movie, it kind of teed up Ty West to bring this sequel to the big screen. And this is a movie that he fully disowned. And basically what this comes down to is an indie horror director making a horror sequel in the studio system. And at first I wasn't sure if it was a Snyder Cut situation where a lot of the footage was reshot, it was edited. I wasn't sure what the extent is of it, but all I knew was that he disowned this movie fully. Because sometimes you have it where there's entirely different footage, sometimes you have it where the footage is just re-edited to a point where the tone and the pace is entirely different. And it's looking like this was a case where the entire movie was re-edited from scratch, and a little footage was shot that was different, at least a little bit. When you go between the producer and Ty West himself, you honestly get a pretty different story. It seems like they were just on entirely different pages, and this was also a time where, they were trying to remain professional, so they weren't going into it or flinging mud or anything, but it kind of sounded like an entirely different story from Ty West to the producer. Ty West described his movie to be more of a John Waters or Todd Solondz film. He said it featured heart wipes and star wipes. I don't know what that means. And he said that basically the recut studio version that we got is a lot less esoteric and idiosyncratic. I didn't really know what those meant, so I looked it up. And what it basically seems like is that Ty West is trying to say that he was going for a much more niche movie. Something a bit distinct, something that kind of would have a small but very passionate audience that gets it, because it seems like it was shaping up to be a movie that you're either on board with or are not. I'd still kind of argue that the version that we did get is that. I do actually kind of enjoy that cut that we did get, but I see what he means. A lot less studio driven, a lot more of its own unique flair as a horror sequel, and just a weirdness that would be off-putting, unappealing to a lot of people. Although I would say the cut that we did get, like I said, it's unappealing to a lot of people and it's weird. The movie just wasn't shaping up to be something that was very mainstream, like I said, not very appealing to a general audience or any kind of wide audience. And when you go from the studio's perspective, they're looking to get the widest audience possible. Sometimes they don't want to deal with a director's vision if it's just too much, too weird, too out there. And from everything Ty West was saying, he wanted to go very much out there and weird. This resulted in what I mentioned earlier, massive interference from the studio, and he said that the movie was entirely re-edited and unrecognizable from the original cut that he put together. It got to a point where he straight up wanted his name removed from the movie. He could be quoted as saying, "I very much wanted the Alan Smithy credit. That would have been a silver lining to me. I would have been more than happy to have promoted the film if I had Alan Smithy on it. They said, no, I'm not DGA, so I couldn't get it. And the DGA doesn't do Alan Smithy anymore anyway, so it was a bummer situation with that. I really do not feel like it's my film. That was a film that was really made by a bunch of other people on that production, and it's unfortunate." If you don't know what he's talking about, the Alan Smithy credit is kind of an iconic thing where basically the director, they want their name removed from the movie. This used to be a thing where the Alan Smithy name would pop up as the credited director for a movie where the director had their name removed from the movie entirely. Something that never happens anymore. But this was what he wanted, and because he just did not feel like it was his movie at that point. He also said, "We cut the movie together. Everyone was like, this is going to be great." And there was this, "Oh, it should be different." Like all the greatness of the past 6 months had never happened. It was like, this is the direction we're going with, come with us. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And they were like, this is what we're doing. And I opted to say, then you should do it by yourself. I knew there was no collaboration at that point. It was going to be what it was going to be, and I wasn't on board with that. I didn't have the power to do anything physically about it. I could have just said cool and gone along with it, but that's not really my personality. And I think it was a bit more of a surprise to them that I said, I'm just going to step aside. I think it made it difficult for them to finish because there wasn't a director involved. It's really unfortunate. This is not the way they wanted it to go either. It was very unfortunate, bizarre experience, very Terry Gilliam-esque, but I do think it resulted in a movie that is fully an Alan Smithy movie, if I've ever seen one. This is the reason they created the pseudonym. It's no person's particular fault, but I will be held responsible like it's my fault when it's not, and that's what Alan Smithy's for. They didn't try to fuck me over. I didn't try to make some crazy art thing. It didn't work out for a bunch of reasons, and I wish they had given me the ability to finish the film. So this is pretty much his perspective on it. You know, trying not to burn any bridges or throw anyone under the bus, but just saying the movie was not turning into what he set out to make. Not what he intended. It was not coming together in the way that he originally was putting it together. And it seemed like they were very much on board until they weren't, and then it feels like that entirely turned around. Don't forget too, this movie had a very long production process. It actually took years even to get this movie out to the general public when it was filmed, I think 2 years previous to it. But you kind of get an entirely different story from the perspective of the producer that ended up pretty much being the one to recut the movie, stitch it back together, and put some new footage into it. Producer Lauren Mose said that she wishes that Ty West stuck with the movie to create an even better product, and said that, I know all the different cuts. Except for the tag ending, this film is probably 90% West cut. It got the wipes in there, it's got the animation in there that he wanted, it's got the 80s references, the Ramones for the songs. It worked very hard to maintain the vision he saw and maintained what he wanted when he wasn't around. Apparently she punched up some scenes, and she said too that Ty West isn't a comedy director when, you know, it seemed like he was going for this outrageous sex comedy in a way. She also said, I believe it's a rare occasion that a director should work without editor. I believe in collaboration for every creative director. They need to be challenged, and West really wanted this film to be somewhat of a John Waters homage. So what better person to edit the film than John Waters' editor to continue that sense of humor? And West's availability drops out, and he's not there. I think it's very much in the vein of his cut. The music choices he's not available for, he's not around to collaborate with the composer. I can't really speak for him, but it looks Ty West making a sequel film to Cabin Fever. I think it's really more the fact that Ty West makes Ty West films, and maybe he's not comfortable making a franchise film stamped by another director. And the thing that West said is that it still does contain a good amount of the footage, but like I said, so much can change when everything's re-edited. The pace could be entirely different, the delivery of lines, or, you know, which cuts you choose, because actors, they film sometimes a ton of different cuts. So the delivery of a joke or a moment, the different one from what Ty West would have selected, maybe was the one that the producer selected. And that could change the tone ultimately. And Ty West really disagrees with what she said in that he's not a comedy director. I think some people would agree there were funny moments in some of his other movies. But his pushback ultimately was him saying that there's a big difference in how you cut a joke together and how you cut a scare together, or how you cut a gross moment, or what kind of sound and music. 90% of the decisions they made are the opposite of what I would have done. Yeah, the people still die in the same way. Yeah, a lot of the dialogue's still in there, but the way it's presented was radically different. The way a joke is put together, I don't think it's funny, and I think the way I did it was funny. I wasn't involved in the music, I wasn't involved in the sound, I wasn't there for anything. So they took some footage I shot, and they just assumed that this would be what I would do, and it's not. It seemed like it caused a lot of confusion amongst the cast, too. Doesn't seem like they fully get why he wasn't on board with this whole thing. The producer really kind of, in a way, I think threw him under the bus and made it seem like he decided just not to show back up, or that he dropped out because of scheduling or his availability, when Ty West very much makes it seem like he walked away because he wasn't happy with where the movie was going. He didn't feel like it was his movie anymore. And it's weird because the producer continually insists that it is his movie. This might have just been cope. This might have just been them trying to salvage the reputation after such a public spat. It's a very bad look when you're trying to sell a movie and the director doesn't want to own it. So maybe that's some of it, and kind of reorienting the narrative. I'm more inclined to believe Ty West because he's the one that walked away. I don't think he really has a stake in disowning this movie, besides maybe he didn't want a movie that was bad to be under his name, I guess. But the producers producers were the ones trying to sell it. They were the ones trying to market this movie, and you would think that Ty West would have more investment in making this movie happen and making it look good, because especially since he couldn't get his name taken off of it, but he didn't stand behind it, and very early on and for a very long time before the movie came out, he had fully been disowning it. He was out of it. He just didn't consider it his movie. I think it's interesting because there are some stylistic aspects to the movie that I definitely see his voice shining through in, but I get what he means when you are making a studio horror movie. It's not his franchise, it's not his studio, it's Lionsgate that he's dealing with, and that's an entirely different ball game than having a small budget and working in an indie system. Stars like Ryder Strong said that he thought the movie was awesome. He didn't understand why Ty West walked away. Same thing with Rusty Kelly, who insisted that everything they liked in the script was still intact in there. Ty West still said, though, that he had a good time filming it for when he was involved. He enjoyed the collaboration process with the stars and everybody there, and he said that there was ultimately no hard feelings. He did insist, though, that he should not receive credit for this movie regardless of the reception well before it came out. He said, hey, if you like it, I'm glad you like it, but don't give me credit, and if it's bad, don't give me credit for that either. And as mentioned earlier, he continued to keep going and saying that the movie was entirely re-edited from scratch, and the producers shot some footage, particularly what it seems like was that end tag was entirely reshot and added into the movie, not by Ty West at all. But still, he continued to say that he had no animosity towards anybody involved. He said he thinks they had very good intentions, but he just views filmmaking in a much more personal way than he thinks that some of these executives did. And that's true, you know, I'm always someone who's going to side with the creative generally. Like as I talked about with Snyder and his Justice League, I'm going to side with him. Movies where basically it was taken away from the director and the actual creative voice in order to make a more mainstream and studio-friendly version of the movie that's meant to be more crowd-pleasing. I would rather get something more unique and something that comes more from a place of creativity. I know that sounds redundant to say, but I would just rather have that unique voice. And going along with those comedic tones, he went to Fright Fest and said that what he was looking to make was an outrageous comedy. And it seemed like that was also a big point where he really disagreed with the producers about this. They didn't see him as a comedy director, they didn't see what he was doing as very funny, but they were also still insisting that they were keeping his tone and what he was going for in the movie, which I find kind of weird. And it's not only that he kind of got pushed out because they weren't liking what he was doing, but they went over his head and they hired editors without him. This was pretty much the point where they just scrapped everything that he did at that point, pretty much went entirely back to the drawing board with the movie, built it from the ground up in an entirely different way, and then reshot some of that footage, made some different edits and cuts like that. And he said he just couldn't stand by the movie at all. The humor wasn't working for him. He didn't find it to be funny. And he feels like where it went wrong was that he was going for more of the really odd, fine ride lining humor and happiness, which is a very weird, very quirky movie that has a very odd sense of humor. And I feel like that is a tightrope balance that once the rope starts to wobble, you fall on one side or the other. And I think that that's ultimately where he views the humor as a failure of this studio cut. It went overboard and it completely fell on its face in his opinion, and I kind of get it, you know, it isn't that funny. And the absurdity of it could have worked if it just found the right tone, but I don't think it did. And it's sad because Ty West said that he was very excited to make this movie. Eli Roth is obviously an extremely influential director, and Cabin Fever was a huge hit. And when you get offered something like that, especially when you're an up-and-coming director like Ty West was, I'm sure he was excited. But he said that the movie that he made was completely deleted. The way that he put it together, he said he didn't do any of the music in the final cut, which was a big part of his original one. That's another thing that the producers insist that they did keep his music, but Ty West insists that it was deleted and it was taken away from him. Needless to say, they didn't see eye to eye on any part of this. And the movie that eventually came out got pretty horrible reception. You look at the Rotten Tomatoes score, it's terrible. It's got no actual official critic score, which is kind of odd. And then it has a 16% audience rating. Absolutely abysmal. I'm a little shocked that it's rated that bad because I feel like in the right context, this is a fun movie that has schlocky moments that are enjoyable and it could be enjoyed in the right context. And the same thing with IMDb. It's got a 4.3. That's an extremely low rating, I believe, for the franchise, which is out of 4. This has the second lowest rating behind that remake. And that's kind of criminal to me because I think that Cabin Fever 2 is a zillion times better than Patient Zero, which is a huge piece of shit. But the thing is, I think that also also maybe part of it is that Cabin Fever 2 has an interesting creative behind it who shot the movie, and then you have this tangled web of a studio messing with it, tug and pull the back and forth, very mixed things. This at least was a movie made out of passion, whereas Patient Zero was a by-the-numbers piece of shit, straight-to-DVD prequel. Very different story than a movie like this, because at the end of the day, you can appreciate a movie that went for something and just fell on its face, rather than something that was given no effort or thought and just kind of put out there. There's no real box office stats to kind of look at with this movie because it had such a limited release. You can't really gauge that reception in the same way that you could with a lot of other movies, but the reception was poor. The people have spoken, and it's understandable why Ty West didn't want his name on this. But I still think it's a really interesting story, and it's another case study in a director's cut, a auteur or niche director working in the studio system, and how that doesn't work out when you try to put him with a already established intellectual property. And this has happened a lot of times, but I feel like this is one that isn't very well known about or was even kind of just forgotten about. Still though, I thought it was an interesting story. I wanted to talk about it and document these things, but those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think of this whole Cabin Fever 2 Ty West cut situation. What do you think would be different? Do you think that the cut would be better? I'd love to hear in the comments. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.